What does artificial intelligence mean for warfare and security? And how can you protect yourself? Stick around to find out. In early November, there was a big summit of leading experts in Bletchley Park. This is the place where the code breakers used to crack the German Enigma encryption. A very famous place, but the full story about the Enigma is still secret. You can find this on my channel as well. In a video about the NSA, so there was a lot of traditional espionage involved. And so these old school traditional intelligence networks, they had infiltrated the companies that designed these Enigma machines. So they were designing flaws into it so that it would be then easier to break this Enigma encryption machine, with the guys in Bletchley Park and their new calculating machines. So we can expect that we're not getting close to the full picture in public about artificial intelligence and what it means for warfare, obviously. So this summit was about understanding the risks that now happen because almost everyone can use artificial intelligence now. So in the past, it was quite the amount of work and effort to figure out the target population, who they really are, the different groups and how they think and how they would react to something. So the leader in this field was the United States of America. So even as far back in the 1950s or late 1950s, there was a Simulmatics Corporation. Leading experts were working on psychometrics and databases and predicting behavior. So nobody could keep up with the Americans, but now it's a different situation. And so, the West wants to, again, lead the pack and have the best technology. And even back in the past, there were problems because of standard average intelligence methods. So, for example, US officials, they forgot secret files in a hotel room, or plans leaked early for a coup d'etat, that sort of stuff. So you always have to factor in the baseline espionage. So now all kinds of government actors and non-government actors, they all have processing power. They can afford that, and they can buy and steal the necessary data and also the algorithms to attack a target population. So it reminds us of the nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and chemical weapons. It used to be kind of a breakthrough, but then everybody could do it. After Second World War, an American report said that anybody can have a biological weapons program. You need a shack and you need some stainless steel containers and some few experts, and then you can start mass producing pathogens. Very easy and very cheap to do. Chemical weapons, very simple to do. And nowadays, many countries could actually make their own nuclear weapons. So, a modern AI system could detect all kinds of weaknesses in a target population. The algorithm could determine what's necessary to win a war, or at least to cause massive damage. And so for the longest time, for thousands and thousands of years, you had wargaming. That's when military experts, they sit around a table and they have these big maps and they just play act a war. And they see what's going to happen, how can this all work out? So nowadays, you're trying to bring together the military experts and the programming nerds. Now, obviously, the military experts know nothing about programming, and the programming nerds know nothing about the military. So this is when it gets a bit weird. So leading institutions like the King's College London and Stanford University, they all created these new centers of expertise, and they want to gain the advantage. So British Defense Minister Ben Wallace said in July 2023, we're using this simulation all the time, and this affects our decisions. And but then British generals say the United Kingdom would need 10 years of preparation to be ready for war. It's the Russians or whatever. So how does that fit together? You can simulate all kinds of stuff, but then the British military had been decimated and neglected, and so they are a decade behind. If they figured out now war is coming in 10 years, they would barely be ready by then. If war comes earlier, Britain is in big trouble. Now, other countries are doing just as bad. Just as badly, Germany apparently is 15 years behind. So what is going on? More data, better algorithms, yet Europe is not really properly defended. So what are they not telling us? For the Ukraine war, simulations were used that leaked in the press. I think it was the New York Times, or maybe it was the Wall Street Journal. And so while the war was going on, you could collect new data, especially about the new weapon system, in a real environment. And so that new data could then be, again, fed into the algorithms to improve the algorithms. This is kind of a steep learning curve here. And so Ukraine fighters are asking themselves, what does the NATO leadership really want? Do they want Ukraine to win? Do they really want Ukraine to push out the Russians? Or what's the plan here? And then, of course, after, let's say, a year of the war, roughly, then people started to say, well, maybe it's about keeping the Russians busy and making the Russians waste their troops and their tanks and other equipment. So, because when support was not so great anymore, political support for the war, especially in the US, people started to say, well, it's not really America's war. Why should we get involved? Why should we pay all this money? And then some of these older hardcore Republicans, they kept saying, well, Russia is our adversary, and Russia is wasting all its resources. So by spending X amount of dollars in Ukraine, we can destroy a much higher number of dollars or money, a higher value of Russian military capabilities. So isn't that a good calculation? You spend 100 billion and you destroy hundreds of billions of Russian capabilities. And doesn't that make sense? Doesn't that free up American resources to focus on China instead? Okay. And so, these algorithms, they can sort of predict these things, and you could run simulations, and then you could start thinking, maybe it's possible to limit, money to Ukraine, to limit weapons deliveries to Ukraine, so the Russians again believe they can win. And so that makes the Russians, change their outlook, and they put in more troops and more effort and more equipment. And so you lure the Russians back into the conflict, and then you can add weapons deliveries, and you can add stuff, and then destroy more Russian capabilities. This is kind of the future of warfare, apparently. So what do the simulations say about possible use of Chinese troops and North Korean troops in Ukraine? What if the Chinese decide to send all these troops? What then? So all these different entities are working on this AI stuff. DARPA is working on it. RAND Corporation was developing a system called Hegemony. And some experts were asking around at King's College London in 2023. They were asking 140 wargame designers from 19 countries. What about the ethics? Do you program that in? Ethical considerations. What is your approach to that? And so 80% of these wargame simulations, 80% just ignored moral considerations. And so This, of course, becomes a problem. NATO's official policy is that, or standpoint is that war games, they cannot really be reproduced in the real world. Black box, deep learning models, we can't really trust the system too much. And a lot of it is secret, so you don't really know how good these systems truly are. And so then we go back to the 1950s and 1960s. You had the Simulmatics Corporation. It's a very, very interesting company. So they got the best computers, and they also got the best experts. So they were using the Fortran coding language to figure out how the average American, how the average American is. Why is this person a conservative? Why is this person a leftist? So that's when psychometrics really started. That means you define how a personality type can be measured, how extroverted or introverted that person is. Does that person like new things, or doesn't that person like new things? Is that person driven more by fear or more by excitement of a possible gain? And so they started this stuff with the Simulmatics Corporation in a big way. Now, it's not really clear. It's secret how good the Simulmatics Corporation actually was. Now, they said they could influence elections in America. Then, of course, computer power was becoming bigger, and, there were more experts to do that. And so, obviously, the military got involved, and the intelligence agencies were involved, and then you had projects like Camelot. So this was intended to predict uprisings in different countries. So you could check the situation or simulate a situation in other countries. You could also use this for America, because in the Cold War, military was concerned with uprisings and coup d'etats and all that sort of stuff. So even decades ago, this research was painted as civilian, but it was always military funded, obviously. There was Project Troy at the MIT. There was the Center for International Studies, paid for by the Ford Foundation and the CIA. One of the biggest, most important researchers at Troy was Max Millikan, graduated from Yale. And he was also a assistant director of the CIA. So they started Project Camelot in 1964 at the Special Operations Research Office of the American University in Washington, D.C. It was supposed to predict changes in societies, predict uprisings and civil wars. And so they wanted to find out how people acted or thought in countries like Chile or Iran, different segments of the population, the poor people, the mid-level people, the more wealthy people. How can you figure these guys out? And so this program eventually became public to a degree. And of course, the government said, well, this was a small project. It was a failure, and we stopped it. Now, obviously, it was not a small project. It was fairly large. It was continued, and there were significant successes. They were sending experts to all these countries to study the populations, and they were just translating all that knowledge into computer code. So, for example, you had Project Simpatico in Colombia, Operation Task in Peru, program called Politica for Chile, and they were measuring 40 different attributes. The population's trust in the institutions, cultural factors, paranoia, all that stuff. So then, of course, you had these coups d'etats, like in Chile, Operation Fubelt. And now we know that there were simulations first. And then this coup d'etat was done for real. Now imagine, you have a computer model of the target population. And you can run different simulations, using different attributes and variables. We try it this way, we try it that way. And so then you see what simulations are successful. Or you figure out, well, we need certain things in the real world for this to work. So we have to make these little things here and there happen in the real world. So then the coup d'etat will be successful. And so this was the way it was done. And as I've mentioned, it wasn't a magic tool. So you always had problems in the real world. And there was also traditional espionage. So somebody forgot secret files or the plan leaked because of, enemy spies and all that sort of stuff. And so nowadays you have programs like Palantir, Gotham. You have you had Cambridge Analytica, and with this stuff you could really do some outrageous things. So, for example, predictive policing, or you could turn Donald Trump into the political messiah for the right wing, even though Donald Trump did not have real credibility. He wasn't credible for conservatives, and he wasn't, politically credible because he was just after casinos and money and women. So in the span of a few months, using psychometrics, he was turned into this political messiah because the algorithms had figured out what people really wanted and how their thinking process is distorted by wishful thinking, not being able to discern, this is true, this is not true, this is true, this is not true. And so now you have basically the opportunity. To turn Nikki Haley into the new star, or Ron DeSantis into the new star. But for some weird reason, they're not doing this. It says like, well, they're not doing so well in the polls. Trump is doing better. The people want Trump. But the software made people want Trump. So now you can make people want Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis. So what's going on here? So you can pull off all kinds of shenanigans. You could try a political cartel, a two-party cartel in the United States. This is possible to do. So, for example, you study the population, you figure out, well, these people are more conservative because of their personality type and how they grew up. These people are more, to the left because of their personality type, how they grew up. So how can you keep this in an artificial equilibrium, right? So it's always 50-50. It's always like, two big parties, and nobody's really winning permanently. It's always stringing people along. 4 more years of this, 4 more years of that. Wouldn't that be an interesting thing to do with this artificial intelligence? It's just to keep people in this two-party system forever, and nobody really wins. And of course, you can use this sort of software to maintain international tensions, because most countries, they need tension to function, to be able to exercise power. They need external pressure. So what happens if different countries out there, if they're starting to use artificial pressure, if they use algorithms to figure out how to keep people afraid and involved in useless conflicts? So what happens if the simulations say people are disinterested in regular wars? They don't care about Ukraine. They don't care about Israel. They don't care about South Korea. They don't care about this. They don't care about that. And they don't believe. People don't believe things could really escalate. So what if a simulation actually says that? Because people can turn off the television, they can just ignore certain wars on the internet, and it's just, out of their perception. What if a simulation says the big powers, they need something really scary to get people involved again, to make them afraid? What if the military leadership, what if the political leadership, what if they are faced with this situation? Let's say, for example, in Russia, if the simulation says we have to use nuclear weapons in a limited fashion or in a mid-sized fashion, and otherwise Russia as a regime cannot continue to exist. They will lose money, they will lose power in the next 10, 20 years. They will be way far behind Europe, and Russia will be way far behind the US. And even other countries can just become more powerful, the Turks or Japan or whatever. What if the simulation actually says these things? I mean, there was something along those lines in the 1980s, I believe it was, the height of the Cold War. So the Russians, they had a calculation program, piece of software that was measuring the strength of the regime, the health of the communist regime. And so once this number, this final tally, once this was getting below a certain value, they were ready to use nuclear weapons. The best way to protect yourself against all of this madness is to get smart quick about these empires, about the intelligence world, how this all works, and then this targeted propaganda doesn't really work on you anymore, and you can start communicating better with other people, and also you can have more influence on more powerful people and lower the risk for everyone. Because this AI stuff is not a miracle weapon. It's just like nuclear weapons or chemical weapons or biological weapons. It's not a magic fix for state actors and non-state actors. Okay, so there is a lot you can do just by getting smarter, and we're saving you a lot of time because I've spent quite a bit of time studying the empires, studying the intelligence world, and so this is your channel where you can save time and you can get on top of these things fairly quickly. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so, leave a comment and like this video and spread it on social media.